go along with this?
Well, I have to tell you, this omnibus was absolutely disgraceful. It is a massive bill. It is 4,155 pages. It's $1.7 trillion of new government spending. And it is a massive spending bill on the way out the door. It is a giant gift to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. In just a few days, we're going to have a Republican House of Representatives in Washington. Nancy Pelosi obviously doesn't want to enact the policy priorities of a Republican House of Representatives. So Pelosi and Schumer decided to team up together and ram through this final omnibus bill, this massive spending that funds the federal government through most of next year, all the way through September 30th of next year. Now, they could not do so without the active assistance of Senate Republicans, and the reason for that is in the Senate we have the filibuster, which means it takes 60 votes to move this bill forward. At the end of the day, they got 60 votes because a total of 18 Republicans voted with Nancy Pelosi, voted with Chuck Schumer, and voted to fund the Pelosi-Schumer spending bill and simultaneously to pull the rug out from the brand new incoming Republican majority in the House. I got to tell you, I am furious. I'm flabbergasted. There are things I've seen in Washington. They're spending bills that are indefensible. But it's one thing when Democrats act like socialists. It's another things when Republicans actively facilitate it. And it was a galling and horrific thing to watch.
You know, so many Americans right now, Senator, are struggling, and we've seen what's happened with inflation, with interest rates. There's been a lot of wealth that's been lost over the last year, people in their 401k, retirement funds, those that invest. And when you're spending this type of money now, it costs you a lot more because this is money we don't have. We're going to borrow this money, and it puts us into even more debt at a much higher interest rate. And that's where many economists have been saying, hey, you guys don't understand that the day of reckoning is going to come for the United States of America. You guys have spent this next generation into oblivion. I mean, you've got so much government waste. Rand Paul came out with his annual Festivus report, $482 billion in government waste. There were some idiotic items in there, $3 million to watch hamsters fight on steroids, $2.1 million to tell Ethiopians to wear shoes. I mean, these are some of the things that your tax dollars actually went for. And this is just in another year of wasteful government spending that has happened. And now it's going to cost even more to borrow this money.
Well, look, the spending is massive. The debt goes up. It locks in Democrat priorities, and it also defangs the incoming Republican majority, which is what Senate Republican leadership wanted. If you look at the 18 Republicans who voted for it, you've got Roy Blunt from Missouri. He's retiring. He's not going to be there next year. You've got John Bozeman from Arkansas. He was just reelected, so he has 6 years till he faces the voters. You've got Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia. You've got Susan Collins from Maine. You've got John Cornyn from Texas. You've got Tom Cotton from Arkansas. You've got Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. You've got Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma. Jim Inhofe is retiring as well. He's not going to be there next year. You've got Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, who helped Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi pass this massive funding bill. You've got Jerry Moran from Kansas. You've got Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who was just elected in November. You've got Rob Portman from Ohio, who's retiring. You've got Mitt Romney from Utah. You've got Mike Rounds from South Dakota. You've got Richard Shelby from Alabama, who's retiring. You've got John Thune from South Dakota, who was just elected in November. You've got Roger Wicker from Mississippi, and you've got Todd Young from Indiana, who was just elected in November. And I got to say, and there were a couple of others. Marco Rubio voted initially to move this bill forward. He didn't vote for it at the end of the day, but he refused to vote against cloture at the outset to stop it. I got to tell you, Ben, I cannot tell you why these Republicans voted for it. There is no explanation that I think makes any sense. I can tell you what they were telling Republicans privately in the lunches. They were saying, okay, there are a variety of different talking points. One, they say we need to get our work done. I don't even know what that means. Our work done doesn't mean passing the Schumer-Pelosi priorities. That's not, in fact, the work that the voters elected us to do. They also said, it was interesting, one of the arguments they made is they said, well, this is doing a favor to Kevin McCarthy and the House Republicans, because if they have to come in and actually vote for government funding, there'll be a big fight, and they don't want to have a big fight. So if we just take this off the table, clear the decks is what they call it. That's Washington speak. It'll be good for them. I'll tell you who disagreed with that really strongly was Kevin McCarthy. And actually the House Republicans were loudly and repeatedly saying, do not do this. Do not pass this bill. Do not enable the Democrats to roll our incoming Republican majority. And yet, I'll tell you, a number of those folks retiring, it will not surprise anyone to see them opening up a lobby shop. And that thing was filled with earmarks. It was filled with pork. It was filled with wasteful spending. And this was the swamp in all of its hideous glory.
It's one thing to see the Democrats do this. You expect it. When you see the Republicans do this, if you just need to see how excited the Democrats were, all you had to do was look at Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi's reaction. They touted this and the White House as a massive policy victory, a policy victory that they could not accomplish without Republicans joining them. You mentioned some of the reasons why, but how much of this just came down to give me what I want for my state, give me my share for the people that are lobbying me, that I need them to take care of me in the future, and then you can get my vote. I mean, there were some people on that list that you just mentioned that I think shocked a lot of people in the conservative movement. Tom Cotton, for example, is one of those, where there was a lot of fodder. I saw people going, I understand some of these others, right? I get Alaska, I get Murkowski and others like that, but that one was shocking.
Look, I have no explanation. You're going to have to ask Tom. There's some Republicans who pointed to, well, there was more defense spending in this. You know what? We could have done that next year. I don't think that remotely justifies voting for Schumer and Pelosi's budget, and that's what they did here. Listen, Washington is a town that is inherently corrupted, and one aspect of this that hasn't been fully understood is the important role that earmarks played in making this pass. So earmarks are the provision where a member of the House or a member of the Senate can specially designate spending in their district for something they want. And it is the grease that turns the wheels of big government. And when we had the Republican takeover in 2010 of the House of Representatives, one of the big reforms, one of the great conservative victories, was ending the policy of earmarks for Republicans. And so we had a decade where we didn't do earmarks. Well, unfortunately, Republican leadership didn't like that, because earmarks are how you buy off a problematic member. If someone's going to vote against you, if someone's talking too loud, if they're objecting to what you're trying to do, you just shovel a little bit of cash in their district and they shut up. It's the gateway drug to the rest of big government spending. Well, unfortunately in this, earmarks are back, and are back in incredible force. And that has included spending. So Pat Leahy, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee from Vermont, he's retiring. He named a huge program up in Vermont, the Pat Leahy program. Richard Shelby, the leading Republican from Alabama on appropriations, he's retiring also. He named a bunch of things after himself, Richard Shelby. I got to say, Ben, I think it is fundamentally corrupt for any member of Congress to name a damn thing after themselves. And I don't think anything should be named after a member of Congress as long as they're still alive. If someone kicks the bucket, you want to name something after them, great. But my view, if you want the Ben Ferguson building, you got a real simple way to do it. Pull out your checkbook and write a check for it. But when you're in Congress, You're not spending your money. You're spending the taxpayer money. And the idea that you have members of Congress sticking their name on it, I think is just on its face corrupting and a corrupt practice.
There was an interesting threat that was made by the House, many House members. And I want to know your thoughts on, do you believe this is just political theater, or is this going to actually be backed up, where there were Republicans, including some in the new leadership, who said, for any of these Republicans that vote with the Democrats on this omnibus spending bill, when they could have done a CR, they could have said no, they could have allowed the next Congress to do a better spending bill with some accountability in it. They said, you can kiss your initiatives in this new Congress goodbye, your bills goodbye. We're going to hold you accountable for this vote right before everybody just wanted to get out of town. Do you believe there's going to be some real accountability in that way from the House, or was that more just political theater to get the headline out there that you're standing up to the senators on the Republican side that basically sold us out?
Well, look, I hope there's real accountability. The congressman who led that effort is Chip Roy. Chip Roy is a congressman from Texas. Chip is a very good friend of mine. I know Chip very, very well. Chip was my very first
with him.
Huh?
We did a bus tour stop with him, in fact.
We did, and Chip was my very first chief of staff. When I was newly elected in 2012, arrived at the Senate in 2013, Chip started with me on day one as my chief of staff. And Chip is a warrior. He's a conservative warrior. The battle against Obamacare that resulted in a shutdown, but that also resulted in the biggest Republican victory in decades in the 2014 election. Chip was my chief of staff throughout that. Chip is the one who leveled this threat, and a number of other House Republicans joined him. I don't know if they'll be able to carry through on it. It will prove difficult, given that among the people supporting this omnibus are all of the members of Republican leadership. And so for a House member to say we're going to block anything they support, the threat is significant, but at the end of the day, blocking anything Republican leadership supports at a minimum may prove difficult to execute.
Senator, I want to go back just before we move on from this to the price tag on this omnibus spending bill. How did we get to a point where we could even imagine enough stuff to spend money on that is almost $2 trillion?
Well, look, the Democrats today have handed their agenda over to the radical extremes. That many of the Democrats in the House and Senate are openly embracing socialism. They're happy to spend all the money they can, and far too many Republicans are eager to be complicit in it. And that you roll this all together to buy up votes. The earmarks help you buy votes. But there are all sorts of provisions of this bill that reflect the fact that it was written by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. So, for example, the funding for Customs and Border Patrol explicitly prohibits that funding from being used to improve border security. Let me read you the language. None of the funds provided in this subsection shall be used to acquire, maintain, or extend border security technology and capabilities, except for technology and capabilities to improve Border Patrol processing. In other words, you can use this money to let illegal aliens go more quickly, but you can't actually use it to secure the border and stop them from entering. By the way, that same budget allocates $410 million towards border security for Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, and Oman. It's really striking. So we're funding border security in other countries, but not here in the United States, and they're writing into law a prohibition on the money being used to improve border security. There's $1.5 billion for membership in global organizations, including the United Nations. All right, you want to know how you buy off votes? Here's an interesting thing. Pick a really random word that you would not think appeared in this bill, much less appears 48 times. Take a guess.
I'm thinking of the worst people in the Congress writing this thing. So is it handout? Is it government aid? I mean, what's their favorite word when they're
No. Be more parochial than that. The word salmon, as in
really?
the fish.
Really? Okay, I was in a totally different world.
Appears 48 times in the bill. What else is there? There's $3 million for bee-friendly highways.
That's important. I know that was one of your top agenda items when you were running for the Senate, right?
You got to take care of the bees, and this is the birds of the bees, because I got to tell you, the taxpayers are getting screwed. This is a lesson in Washington, birds and bees.
You mentioned the border. I have to get back to that for a second.
Yep.
We're securing the border in other countries. You had Zelensky that flew in and got was the rock star of Congress this past week. Kissing with Nancy Pelosi. We're giving him money literally to secure his border instead of sending that money down to secure our own border. Did that frustrate you at all that they're like advocating, and how much do you need? You got to secure your border, sir. Ours is wide open. We know there's 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 coming across the border. Can't wait for Title 43 to end, and then they're going to all come rushing across. And even the Democrats accidentally slipped this last week, saying, well, they admit there is a crisis at the border, but we're, quote, handling it.
It is absolutely insane. And I will say the adulation for Zelensky was bizarre. I think the Democrats, it's become almost cult-like. And at the same time, a complete refusal to have any meaningful accountability as to the money that's being spent there. Listen, I'm someone that believes it is important for our national security interest for Russia to lose, for Putin to lose. And so I've been an active advocate of supporting Ukraine. But for the Democrats, it's a blank check. And it's a blank check not just for military weapons to defeat Russian soldiers, but for just billions of dollars that get poured into rat holes and are subject to corruption, are subject to embezzlement. And it is bizarre. But you also asked me, how do we get there? In the debate over this bill, one of the strangest things that was said is Mitch McConnell at a press conference said, I think the number one priority for most Republicans is funding Ukraine. Now, Ben, that is strange. I don't get the mindset that says that. I believe defeating Russia is important, but I don't know anyone in real America. I don't know any Texans. I don't think I've ever encountered anyone who says, the number one priority for me, for America right now is funding Ukraine. That's the Republican leadership right now.
When he said it, it was something that went viral quickly in Republican circles, conservative circles online. But he meant it. It wasn't a slip from McConnell. He genuinely was saying this is the number one priority. Not you, not your safety, not your country, but Ukraine. And if you're not with us, then you're on the side of Vladimir Putin. I didn't like the way how in the last several weeks this has been. This framing is, if I ask any questions, oh, you're with Putin. I got yelled at on TV the other day for this center where I was like, look, I'm in favor of stopping Russian aggression. I'm not in favor of us funding the entire thing. I'm not in favor of us being the one that's writing the check with no accountability or with no auditing, no accounting of where the money is actually going. And the rest of the world, especially in Europe, and I said this, they claim they were going to get involved. We're overwhelmingly funding this Ukrainian war. They're not stepping up to the plate either. And I'm tired of America always being the first one to say, here, the American taxpayers will write you a $50 billion check. And then you look at all the countries in Europe who, by the way, are buying oil from Vladimir Putin for decades, keeping him in power. When we warned them, Donald Trump warned, that he warned Europe, you guys need to stop doing this. You're going to make him powerful. He's going to be able to control you. And now they're putting hardly any money into this fight against Russia, and they're doing nothing really to help Ukraine.
Yeah, listen, it is bizarre the cult-like support Democrats are showing. The complete unwillingness to have any accountability, the desire to just have write a blank check, the unwillingness to hold Europe to account for them to pay their fair share of it. The Democrats don't believe it. And of course, the utter irony of this whole thing is it was Joe Biden that caused the damn war in the first place. And we've talked about that at length, how the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the sanctions that I authored, had stopped Russia from invading Ukraine, and then Joe Biden waived the sanctions on Russia and Putin and caused this war, and now they're trying to cover up for their cleanup on aisle 6, the mess that they made by just shoveling cash. It really makes no sense at all.
I do think it's important that people hear, this is, again, in Washington, D.C., Mitch McConnell making it clear that he's going to spend your money on his top priority. Here he is in his own words.
Providing assistance for...
there's a lot of things that are right now, confronting this country. And when you go to Washington Center, you sit around, is this truly how out of touch they are with the reality of the American family who's dealing with inflation? I mean, USA to Ukraine, you have $45 billion within the Omnibus bill. You had $1.8 billion in another package, and $68 billion has already been sent. And he says this is the number one priority of the GOP is focused on this. That is a hell of a lot of money that we're borrowing. Again, we don't have this money. We're going to have to borrow it, and we're going to have to pay interest on it.
Well, Ben, look, that's a big part of the reason why I helped lead the leadership challenge to Mitch McConnell just a few weeks ago, because our leadership is fundamentally out of touch. That doesn't reflect the priorities of the American people, and I think that's an enormous problem. You look at some of the elements of this bill beyond that. There's $65 million for two programs named for Senator Pat Leahy. There's a federal building named for Nancy Pelosi. There's $3.6 million for the Michelle Obama Trail. There's $477,000 for, quote, anti-racist training from the Equity Institute. There's $3 million for the LGBTQ plus museum in New York. There's $1.2 million for services for DACA recipients. There's $4.1 million in career programs for Fairfax County, Virginia, one of the richest counties in the country. It renames 25 post offices. There's $524 million for a DEI and structural racism subdivision of the National Institutes of Health. There's $300,000 per year for the continuous plankton recorder. This is Washington corruption. Plain and simple. And it is a result. We expect Democrats to be a train wreck. We expect them to be socialist. What we should be willing to expect is for Republicans not. And the maddening thing is, this didn't take anything particularly complicated or difficult to stop it. All we had to do was have 41 Republicans stand up and say no. The last 4 times there was a shift in control of one of the houses of representation, the Congress, each of the last 4 times, did not pass an omnibus funding bill. The incoming party who was getting control had enough cojones to stand up and say, hell no, we just won an election. We're going to set the spending priorities. Now, look, there's reference to the uniparty. I got to say, for the Republicans who supported this, I get the ones who are retiring, why they did, although it makes you wonder what the hell they were doing previously. But I don't understand anyone who cast a vote for this, and I think a lot of the voters are pissed off, and I think they have good reason to be pissed off.
How much of this is an age thing? And I say that because you look at Nancy Pelosi at her age, you look at Mitch McConnell at his age, you look at Joe Biden at his age, and you look at Chuck Schumer at his age. They know that when the you-know-what hits the fan, Senator, they're probably not going to be around to have to deal with it. There is going to be a catastrophic event economically within our government, within this country, to pay back this debt at some point. And as part of the reason why they just can do this so easily is just the fact they say, it ain't my problem, literally. This is not going to hit the fan when I'm in office, much less I may not even be alive by then. Yes, it's going to affect my grandkids, right, or even my kids, but not me, so screw it, I'll go with it.
Yeah, it's not just age. I mean, the people that voted for this ran the gamut of the age. Look, there are people in the Senate who are 142, so there are definitely some folks who are long in the tooth. But, you know, Tom Cotton is one of the youngest members of the Senate. He voted for this. Todd Young is a relatively young member of the Senate. He voted for this. Marco Rubio voted to take this up initially. He's younger than I am, one of the youngest members of the Senate. So it's not just an age thing, but I'm going to let them speak for themselves. They can explain why this spending bill was better than a spending bill that was passed with a Republican majority in the House. I promise you, a House Republican majority is not going to write into the bill the funds in this bill cannot be used to secure the border. That's something Pelosi and Schumer do. But for Republicans, they're willing to, at least some of them are willing to roll over and allow it to happen. Look, I think for the Democrats, they don't care. I think the Democrats, their solution at the end of the day, we're seeing it right now. Their solution at the end of the day is inflate their way out of it. Just print so much money, have hyperinflation that the debt, as a percentage of, as the value of the dollar goes down, the debt becomes less relevant. And for them, it's about power. Look, we've seen socialist governments do this all over the country, all over the world, rather. And I think that's on the left where it comes from. For Republicans, listen, I think most Republicans in the Senate, if you ask them, they are concerned about the debt, but they're more concerned about being criticized. They're more concerned about the media saying something mean about them. They're more concerned about not having, not being reelected. And spending a bunch of cash is a great way to buy votes and try to get reelected. And so it is, this is, I've been in the Senate 10 years. I've never seen it this bad with Republicans literally undermining the ability of Republicans to pass a Republican budget. That's what they just did.